Good evening and welcome to the Gold, Goats, and Guns live stream here on Periscope and YouTube. My name is Tom Luongo. I hope you're all having a great evening. We've all had a good week. It's been a very interesting week. There's a lot going on. And we've got a big election coming up this weekend in Germany, which I want to talk about. So let's get right to it, shall we? We're not going to waste too much time here. So I've got an article up on my blog over at goldgoatsandguns.com right now. Is talking about Italy, Bavaria, the Bavarian elections, Angela Merkel, Italian bond CDSs, the whole nine yards. All of that stuff is coming together at the same time. And we've got that happening along with crazy stuff going on in U.S. domestic politics. Saudi Arabians and the Turks are at each other's, are playing games with over the death of the disappearance of the Saudi journalist Khashoggi. A lot going on, and it all seems to be accelerating. So let's talk about the Bavarian elections, though, because that is the most proximate, most pressing concern right now. Sunday, Bavaria goes to the polls, and and this is going to be a litmus test for the strength of Angela Merkel's coalition. It's going to be a litmus test of the strength of the CDU-CSU union that's been together now for decades. It's going to be a litmus test on the stability and strength of the German political institutions as we currently understand them. And once that becomes, and once we have some answers about that this weekend, we'll know how much leverage Italy is going to have in upcoming budget talks and everything else. For those of you who are worried about it, we had no issues. This is an aside. We got nothing of Hurricane Michael over where I am. Missed us completely. So didn't even get any rain. I think we got one small rain band for about 20 minutes. So no storm here. It always seems to miss us, and I always, almost feel bad about it. But that's where we are in North Florida, this area, north in Gainesville and north of Gainesville, and this whole north central Florida area. It's really hard for us to get a direct hit with a hurricane. So, be that as it may. All right, getting back to Bavaria. So, if you haven't been following it, and I know I've written a lot about this recently, and if you haven't been following it, that's fine. But it's important to understand that the CSU has ruled in Bavaria unilaterally with an outright majority for decades. And the latest polling has them down around 35%, meaning they're going to have to form a coalition government with someone. And we talked about it a little bit this afternoon on a video I did this afternoon, but the polls that we've seen have the Greens sucking up a lot of that fall, and I just don't believe it. While AfD, Alternative for Germany, the other right-wing or nominally right-wing party, the opposition party, the Eurosceptic party, the one that everybody in Germany is scared, everybody's German, and everyone who's in the German political elite are deathly afraid of. We're only polling now around 11 to 12%. They hit a high of around 15% over the summer, which may have been what caused Horst Seehofer, the former head of the CSU, to try and scuttle the coalition earlier in the year in order to shore up the CSU's vote here in for this election. Now, that's part of what was going on back then, so. If you look at the polls, it looks like that strategy might have worked. But how accurate are the polls? We know the polls here in the United States are dog shit. We know that there are lies, damn lies, statistics in British polling. And I don't know how bad the polling in Germany is. And I've talked to some German commentators about this, and they're not really sure either. So we're going into this weekend where no one's talking about this as being a big deal, but I think it could be, because if the CSU comes in at 35% and AFD upside surprises at 15 or 16%, and nobody else gets 15%, then the CSU, in order to avoid building a coalition with AFD, is going to have to try and do the tri-party thing that Merkel tried earlier, this time last year, trying to do the Jamaica thing, where she tried to put a coalition together between the Union Party, her Union Party, the Greens, and the Free Democrats, and that didn't work. And AFD is polling around 18 to 19% nationally, but we don't know what's going on in Bavaria. So, how accurate are the polls? How much have the German electorate? How much has shifted in the German electorate is anybody's guess at this point. It really is anybody's guess, because I've spoken to a bunch of people about this, and there are a number of Germans who are very scared about being, or not very scared, but they don't want to be seen as being radical. There's still that natural shame over being associated with anything even remotely nationalist. That's perfectly understandable. But there comes a point where things have got to change. And if the CSU is forced into a bad coalition situation, it doesn't bode well for the longevity and the health of Merkel's national coalition. And I keep pounding this point home. I keep thinking that, to me, this is the kind of political black swan that no one in the markets is handicapping at this point. I don't see it in the markets. I see the way the market's traded today, and I'm like, pretty obvious to me that they just shut off the computers after about 1 o'clock. They got the numbers about where they wanted them, and they shut the computers off. Gold didn't move after 9 o'clock, really, after about 9:30 this morning. The euro popped down to about 115.5, and then flatlined for the rest of the day. It's one of those days where it was almost like everybody just said, everything looks good. And we see that on Fridays every once in a while, where they get the markets to where they kind of want them, and then everything just kind of shuts off. And nothing happens for the last 3 or 4 hours with the trading after the COMEX closes at 1:30. So, I don't know. It's almost like everybody's waiting on pins and needles to see what happens here going forward. And, I mean, even Salvini didn't come out and, drop a stink bomb in the last couple of days, right? Everybody on both sides, both Brussels and Rome, are just kind of waiting in the weeds to see what happens with Bavaria. But even though no one's really talking about this, because if Salvini is serious about forming a League of Leagues, if he's serious about mounting a real Eurosceptic insurgency within the European Parliament for next May's elections, then Alternative for Germany is a big deal, because they could easily be polling 22 to 23, maybe even 25%, depending on how things break, between now and then. They could become the dominant party in Germany. They're only within about 4 or 5 points of that right now, because if the CDU-CSU splits over the Bavarian election results on Sunday, then you're looking at a situation where the CDU, Merkel's party, is only polling around 21 to 22%. And they have AFD is polling at 18%. Well, then they're within 4 points of becoming the dominant party in Germany. I mean, 23% is not a dominant position, but it absolutely then calls into question the confidence of Merkel's government. Now, we know these cartel-style European governments can last for years. I mean, look at Spain. There ain't one party in Spain that's got more than 20% of the vote. 4 of them involved in the 3 or 4 of them are involved in the friggin' governing coalition. It's silly. These coalitions don't stand for anything. They don't. They have no. They have no. They don't govern with any mandate. They're just a caretaker, and they're weak and they're fragile and they're easily manipulated by Brussels. And that's the interesting part about what's happening in Italy. You look at the poll numbers in Italy. Every time Salvini and Di Maio go after Brussels, every time they go after Merkel, every time they stand up and spit in Brussels' eye, poll numbers go up. M5S is back up to nearly 30%. The League is now 35%. The two of them together are governing with popular support close to a supermajority. Those poll numbers rise much further, and they can call for a snap election and get a supermajority, and then make real changes to the Italian constitution if they want. This just popped into my head. I'm like, they're that close. So, very, very, very interesting times that are happening in Germany, Italy, and the rest of them. And I know, y'all probably want to talk about Pastor Brunson and all this other stuff, but I haven't really gotten a handle on what happened with this guy Khashoggi. I'm like starting to get up to speed on it. But I understand the dynamics here, right? Which is that in broad strokes, very obvious that Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince in Saudi Arabia, nay, the actual ruling king, thinks that Donald Trump will let him do whatever the hell he wants. And so his idea that he can go out and destroy his political opposition whenever he wants and just have them taken out, that's something that he fundamentally, I think, still believes that he can just do whatever he wants. After the purge last year, even though he was told flat out the siege against Qatar was unwarranted and was not wanted by Washington. So I think bin Salman has put himself in a very ugly position here. And Turkey is in a position to extract a major concession from both Saudi Arabia and the United States, and I think they got that today. I think there's a massive horse trade that just happened between the United States and Turkey over Brunson and the outing of this guy, Khashoggi. So, or the offing of this guy. Everybody's a CIA asset, User 13. That's the point. And they're all dirty. The real question is, what's the geopolitical fallout from this? Because the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Israel have really pushed the envelope to the point where no one else in the world is happy with them other than them, than each other. And that's a dangerous situation to be in, regardless of what Trump thinks he's trying to do or trying to accomplish. Okay? Because it's not his policy at this point. It's a mishmash of the generals and Israel and the Saudis and all of this chaos, and it's a complete mess. And it's not good. And it's terribly destabilizing, and it's pushing all of the major players that aren't those three into a de facto alliance with each other. Really, really weird how this is playing out. It's funny. It's like, I was reading some stuff the other day. I guess I was reading the Gareth Porter article that was at Anti-War, and then it got scraped over to Russia Insider, and he was talking about some of the excerpts from Bob Woodward's book about Trump, about the Trump White House, and the stuff that was not talked about by the press, but the actual stuff, which is that it painted a very interesting picture of Trump literally saying to all these people standing around him, all of his cabinet members, going, "Let's just get these people out of here. Let's get our troops home. Let's dismantle all this stuff." And they all just kept giving them the same party line over and over again. And as much as he would fight them and go, "Give me a good reason why we should be here," and this is one of the things where I just honestly believe I don't see any reason for Woodward to lie about any of this stuff, because it makes Trump look weak, but it makes him look smart, right? It makes him look like exactly the person that we elected and we thought we were getting, but he's just trapped by the machine that's around him, and he's not smart and he's not strong enough to just say what needs to be done and just make people implement it. I mean, I have to wonder at this point, where is his end game? And then when I do think about that end game, I think, okay, 3 weeks from now we have the midterms, and that's going to change everything, because now he may have a sympathetic Congress and making that. And I think the Kavanaugh confirmation fight is one of those moments, and I said it before and I'll say it again, is one of those moments where Trump proved his bona fides to the GOP and said, look, I can win a major political battle. I just did. Now, let's go get some work done. Trump is on a very tight leash. Tony, this is where you and I disagree. I don't think Trump is getting his way. I think he's acquiesced on a great number of these issues against his will. But at the same time, I also think that he's like, okay, fine. If you guys want to do this, that's fine. But at the end of the day, you're going to own it, because I'm not going to own it. Okay? I'm just going to come back and say, yep, we're getting out. We're done. That was a mistake. Let's bring everybody home. And no, I never bought that MBS was a reformer. I always knew he was cut from the same cloth as every other Saudi head chop and Salavist asshole. So, that's where we are. So it's going to be interesting to see what Trump does after the midterms. Because if you're watching the polling numbers in the United States, it's obvious that they're all moving in the right direction. It's obvious that they're all moving towards where the Republicans holding serve. I don't know if you've been looking at, I've just been looking at the RCP average, the Real Clear Politics average, and it's I was reading some of the comments, so I got lost in that. The RCP average is obvious that the numbers are moving in the Republicans' direction. And if you look at the toss-up states, out of the 34 states that are 34 House districts that are still toss-ups, 32 of them are currently held by Republicans. And every one of those people, and most of them, polls have them leading by a point or two. I just don't see that, and a lot of those polls are old. They're pre-Kavanaugh stuff. I honestly think that the Republicans are already in a position where they know what the numbers are and they know they're going to hold the House. Now, User 13, I think you misunderstand what I said. The opposition, the GOP, the opposition to Trump within the Republican Party had, of course, the GOP had to prove to us, the base, that they were on Trump's side. But Trump had to prove to them from that circle that he could win a major political battle. And he did. This was the biggest political battle of Donald Trump's presidency, and he won it, and he's making everybody around him look good right now. And I think Trump designed the Kavanaugh confirmation hearings to force that wedge issue, to force it from that perspective. I think he chose Kavanaugh. I've said this before. Brett Kavanaugh just looked like a bug zapper to a bunch of freaking to a bunch of freaking gnats like that the Democrats are. They could not help themselves to go towards the light and go, he's rich and young and white and male and a alien and he's evil and he's all these things, and all we have to do is run nuts and sluts on him and we can get rid of him. We can win. It's like that thing was like designed out of Tony Podesta and Hillary Clinton Central. I mean, that's how it was. Sad, actually, how amateurish the whole thing was. Like I said, we can see you. We can see you pulling the levers behind the curtains, dumbasses. By the way, he's a bug zapper, and you just all got zapped. You all flew too close to the light. So, very interesting. I just don't see the Republicans losing 32 seats they currently own. Yes, Jen Johnson, nuts and sluts. You know, and you know what I mean by nuts and sluts. He's either crazy or he's a sexual deviant. And in Trump's case, he's both at the same time in a Moscow hotel room with a hooker. So, just fascinating. Interesting question, Jambo. What are the odds that Turkey faked the whole thing to drive a wedge between Russia and Saudi Arabia? 5-2? I mean, it's a good question. And Erdogan is a sneaky, devious son of a bitch, and there ain't no love lost between him and the Saudis. So, Jesus. It's a really good question. I mean, it's a really good question, and it's one I hadn't even considered yet, which is why I'm like, yeah, the Saudis are not talking about this. I think bin Salman goes down over this. I think either if there was ever a moment. Yes, and Qatar is Turkey's new best friend. If there was ever a moment where Donald Trump could take control of all the assets in Saudi Arabia, it's right now. Because I'm sure that at least half of the assets in Saudi Arabia are controlled by the CIA. The United States needed to get Pastor Brunson out of there, and Moon of Alabama the B over at Moon of Alabama wrote a great article the other day saying that as far as he's concerned, or I think it was yesterday, that we wanted Pastor Brunson back because he's our CIA asset. We wanted him out of the Turkish prison. The Turks wanted to hold on to it because they want Gulen. And the United States figured out, and this whole situation is going to wind up being that we paid behind the scenes via the Saudis for Brunson's extradition. So, battle Saudis versus the Qataris. Different factions of U.S. Western politicians align with Saudi or Qatar. Joanne, I'm not really quite sure I understand what you mean by that comment. So, but this is all really interesting stuff. But again, it's so we can't look like at this point in time. There's no way that we can look like, which is what B was trying to say at Moon of Alabama. We can't look like we're just paying for a hostage. And we certainly can't invade a NATO ally or run an operation on a NATO ally like that. So this is a great opportunity for us to extract maximum pain from the Saudis. What B said over at what Bernard said was that, remember, all those weapons that the Saudis are supposedly buying for $110 billion, that was a non-binding letter of intent that has not been upgraded to an MOU in over a year. An MOU being a memorandum of understanding. And if in the world of major contracts like that, it starts with a non-binding letter of intent, then to a letter of intent, then to an MOU, and then to an actual contract. Right, whacking the guy is one thing. Waiting for him to walk into the embassy and then torturing, killing, and dismembering the guy isn't in the same galaxy. Yeah, no, it's like straight out of an episode of The Americans. Spoken like the true libertarian. WDM. If Trump and the MAGA peds say the government is dysfunctional because of the deep state / resistance, and the Democrats say that the government is dysfunctional because of Trump and the ignorant, deplorable racist, then they both agree that the government should be dumped. Sounds like the libertarian thesis 101. All right. So then we staged the whole thing, and now we're blaming the Saudis for it? See, you got to remember that. Look at what's happened in the last 3 weeks. This literally just popped into my head. 3 weeks ago, an attack on Syria was designed in such a way as to blame Israel for shooting down a Russian plane. Israel blamed major international incident. 3 weeks later, Muslim Brotherhood opponent of the Saudi regime gets killed, tortured, and dismembered in the Saudi embassy in Turkey, causing what? Major international incident. You got to take them both down a peg if you want them under the United States' control. You got to let them overextend themselves and do stupid shit. And at some point, the United States is going to have to be ashamed of their allies and allow the groundwork to be laid to say, look, this cannot go on the way it's going on. This cannot continue. It's time to make peace. Either that, or I know I saw something where Erdogan was to go and speak with the Saudis at some point. There was supposed to be a meeting between them. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I know I read that somewhere. What if this thing was a way of scuttling any rapprochement between the Saudis and the Turks? As always, guys, we don't know the truth. All we can do is lay probability and odds with the information that we have. Spin out the best scenarios we can, and then see how right we are. Because I don't have a good answer for any of this stuff at this point. I wish I did, but I don't. But it's all accelerating. All accelerating. Right. That's Bernard over at Moon of Alabama's thesis, is that Trump will force MBS to buy that $100 billion worth of weapons and not buy S-400s from Russia, which they were considering doing, by the way. Some early voting numbers are favoring Republicans by large margins, and then in 2016. In Florida, it's a huge number. Like, that's a big fucking shock. I can tell you that flat out. Ain't no way Rick Scott's going to lose to Bill Nelson. Ain't no way DeSantis is going to lose to Gillum. Ain't no way that outside of the 3 or 4 Democratic strongholds in Florida, that we don't send 25 or, I don't know, 21 or 21 people to the House next year. Wasn't MBS lionized by Q? If so, that would tell you right here, right now, that Q was nothing but a LARP. And it's too bad that Thomas Wichter is no longer on Twitter for us to see how he can spin this, that Saudi disinformation fuck that he is. But it's too bad. We won't get to see what high comedy that fucking retard puts out. Sorry, I'm a little bitter. That guy was, it was so obvious after a while. That guy's a Saudi disinformation agent. He works for the Saudis. Because he was all about MBS. And he is on Gab, actually. He's complained that he doesn't understand how to make it work. As in, he doesn't have his 20,000 fucking sycophants hanging on his every word. He's actually going to go rebuild his following. And yeah, he got kicked off of Twitter. It was great. I mean, I'd like to see anybody get kicked off, but you know, I don't have to see people retweeting Thomas Wichter at me anymore because he's so insouciant and wise and with it and more informed than the rest of us. Q is not real. Q is a CIA psyop. Anything that brings boomers to 4chan is a bad idea. Wow, that's awesome. Do you mean Krugman? You mean Paul Krugman? Or yeah, make that Krugman. Yeah, that Krugman is like Trump. He never admits mistake. He's too much of a narcissist. He's such an egoist, that guy. He'll never admit that he was wrong. Never. And he'll never give anybody credit who's his political opponent for being right. He's a real piece of work, that guy. Yeah, unfortunately, since I'm not going through Periscope anymore, I can't block the porn bots. So Tom Woods and Paul Gottfried, they weren't not optimistic. They're hardcore doctrinaire libertarians. They're never optimistic. The fact that that CNN is being hard on the Saudis tells you that that bin Salman is behind all this and has really upset the apple cart behind the scenes. Yeah, Krugman is not an economist any more than Jon Stewart is a comedian. Though Jon Stewart is funny, or at least he used to be, before he became a card-carrying member of the DNC. But Krugman he's just terrible. He's not an economist. I mean, Keynesians aren't economists anyway. Let's not kid ourselves, okay? In order to be a Keynesian, you have to not believe in the law of diminishing marginal utility. Yeah, you don't get caught. I mean, Soros has gotten caught. He doesn't give a shit. Think about it. They're out there handing out $50 bills to people right before they go run in and accost senators. We've got videotape of them teaching people how to be protesters. Nope, pull the curtain back. I'm still the great and powerful Oz. Moving levers. User 13. Wichter is nutty as a fruitcake. I'm going to read this. You guys get this for free because this one's beautiful. Wichter is as nutty as a fruitcake. Anyone who thinks the Saudis can actually fight is an idiot. Yemeni tribesmen with crap weapons are holding off their crack troops with our weapons and our planes. The Saudis have our technology. It's like the Saudi military reminds me of the old jokes about the Italian military during World War II. You know, everybody want a nice Italian rifle? Never fired and only dropped once? Yeah, Stephen Colbert used to be funny. And now he's just become a strident boomer. Got no use for these guys. Now, Colbert was, I'll tell you, when Stephen Colbert was his funniest was when he was on Harvey Birdman, Attorney at Law. I never really liked the Colbert Report, actually. I always thought it was kind of tedious. So. Ted Koppel's still alive. Yes, the Saudi royals are afraid to have a strong regular army because they might get overthrown. So they fight mostly with mercenaries. Well, yeah, because he's now going for the distinguished gray look. I'm sure that Colbert has been gray for a long time. I love a good Italian army joke. It just makes me laugh every time. Italian tanks, 2 gears backward and 1 forward in case they get attacked from behind. Oh, the Italians should not fight wars. We're just not any good at it. We were good at it a couple thousand years ago. We're not good at it anymore. Yeah, that's the funny part about it. I look at Bill O'Reilly and I think to myself, a current affair, Bill O'Reilly, and then he's the political pundit on the right. Oh, that guy was never right wing. He was always a leftist, neoconservative, Trotskyite douchebag. Wow. Okay, so Bloomberg, the New York Times, The Economist have all withdrawn media support for a big MBS future. Probably the latest conference he's got set up for Vision 2030. Remember also that you could probably see all this coming when they pulled the Aramco IPO because no one believes the valuation. Italians have realized that running the world sucks and that government is stupid. Victor is an Israeli shill, which at this point means shilling for the Saudis because the Saudis are the Israeli puppets. That's what Wahhabism is. Fine. Fair enough. So many people are Israeli shills. No, it wasn't a blessing in disguise. Everything else about your statement, Rocket Man, was perfect. Don't understand why people loved O'Reilly. I hated him with a passion. Wouldn't even watch him on YouTube or make fun of him because I didn't want to give them the ratings point. I didn't want to encourage them. His firing was a blessing, not in disguise. His firing was a blessing, letting Tucker Carlson rise to new heights. It's a good question as to whether or not Israel turned against bin Salman. The alliance always had to be, it was always a marriage of convenience because the Israelis can't fight on their own. Other than nuclear weapons in their air force. Boomers don't have high standards when it comes to political punditry. I know. Wolf Blitzer. Yeah. Okay. So, things are bad when the mainstream media sounds like Pat Buchanan. How's that? Let's just put it that way. When the mainstream media is saying nearly the same things about Mohammed bin Salman that Pat Buchanan is, pigs are flying in the background, by the way. Just wanted to let you know. I can hear them. They're in the walls. Well, of course the unhinged nutjobs will blame Putin for this. That goes without saying. Yeah, I haven't been following the Ukrainian church, Eastern Orthodox Church wanting to separate from Moscow. Ukraine is sinking into a complete and utter cesspit. Thank you, John McCain. Your legacy will live on in infamy. Asshole. Why haven't the Saudis blamed the Russians yet? Because the Saudis can't survive without the Russians. I don't even know what you're talking about, Tillman, to be honest with you. But the Saudis can't survive without the Russians. They need to have good relationship with the Russians in order to coordinate the oil market. And the Saudis want to still have reserve the right to buy Russian weapons. And what if the United States pulls out of the region? Who's going to help the Saudis stay in power? In a good way or a bad way, about Martin Luther and the Orthodox Church. That'll be good, Tillman. Thank you. The shit against the Saudis is good, but I have to wonder if it could also signal a foreign policy coup here in the U.S. Good or bad coup, meaning the neocons are losing or the CIA is losing. This is what I was kind of intimating earlier, right? If I just don't buy that there's any, I mean, if the Trump White House is in charge of the Saudi operation now, and not legacy Obamaites within the CIA and the rest of them, oh, neocons back in control. Exactly. That's what I'm thinking, because right now Trump's not in charge of any of his foreign policy. The generals won't let him pull the troops out of Syria or Iraq. I saw a report today. The Russians are complaining that the U.S. is trying to set up a quasi-state east of the Euphrates River. No shock there. Of course, that's been from the moment we started building bases out there. This 3 years ago, that this was always the plan, that we wanted to control the oil fields via the Kurds. But the Kurds don't want to be controlled by us anymore. What would happen if the U.S. and Russia quit buying weapons with the Saudis? Saudi government would collapse. That's okay. That's what I thought. The Ukrainian church is not the good, is not healthy Russian Orthodox or Eastern Orthodox. The real Ukrainian church is refusing to give up their church to them. Oh yeah, absolutely. That the tensions between that I'll agree with. That any schism within the Orthodox Church will heighten tensions between the Russia and Ukraine. No doubt. No doubt. Who do I think will replace the Waffle House waitress? Well, thankfully, it won't be Dina Powell. She actually said, I'd rather stay at Goldman Sachs. Yes, she actually wants real power. Yes, I know Bin Nayef was the CIA's preferred guy. So now the question is, who owns Bin Salman? No news is good news about the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. We haven't heard anything about sanctions. Construction is underway. The Russians have said multiple times, go ahead and sanction the project. We'll still build it anyway. Oh, Hillary finally lost her security clearance. Wow. That was only 6 months too late. The neocons going back to the Democrats? Yeah, going back to where they came from. That would be great. Okay. Yeah, if Hillary lost her security clearance, that's big. That means that that Trump is starting to make real moves. And he's confident that the midterms are going to go his way. So who's going to replace? I'll tell you who I want to replace Nikki Haley. Dana Rohrabacher. That's who I would like to see replace the Waffle House waitress. I don't think it'll happen unless Rohrabacher is deposed in California, which I don't think is going to happen either. But he would be a very good choice if Trump is serious about repairing relations with Russia, because Rohrabacher will not be that guy at the UN. Ron Paul is too old, and he hates the UN. He'd never do it. He wants us out of the UN. That's one of the few things he agrees with Trump about. And Ron's done. He's done. He doesn't want to do organized politics anymore. He won't work for the government anymore. Tulsi Gabbard would be. I mean, yeah, she's good on foreign policy. She'd be fine, and it would be a good step for her. And it'd get her out of the. So. Right. She lost her clearance back in August, but MSN says she gave it up. Yeah, she does. No one gives up their security clearance willingly. Let's not kid ourselves. Okay, so let's shift in the last 15, 16 minutes or so. Let's talk about the markets, because this was the other big news of the week. First things first, let me look at the closes. When I saw the opens today, they were positive enough, so I didn't care. But let's just talk about this real quick. The markets. All right. So looking at the Dow, no real good technical damage has been done. The Dow would have to break down below 23,000 for me to get even excited at this point. Reason being is that you could easily look at this correction as a setup and a little bit of base building before we move on to the next leg higher. It wasn't too bad. What was it? 1,000 points? I mean, unless you're heavily invested in the NASDAQ. Then the NASDAQ is a different story. Now, the NASDAQ hasn't really done a tremendous amount of technical damage to itself, but it's more vulnerable because valuations there are much, much, much worse. Well, yeah, but you have to get rid of the central banks first, RB Tools. Shouldn't we make our societies more durable than the whims of market speculators? Yes, but that would mean getting rid of the friggin' central bankers. So, go Bitcoin. Okay. So, I don't really think much of this week's move down. Serious question. So, and Dragon, that's where I'm going to go next. I don't think this week's movement in the markets was really all that interesting. I just don't. There's no real good technical damage has been done. If we had more follow-through action today and we closed at the bottom of the range of the week today, it would have been a different story. But then what we got today, no. And it just looked like all the markets kind of reset a little bit. And I think there's a little bit of let's try and scare the normies into not voting for Trump before the election. I think there's a little bit of that going on. I think there's a little bit of the ECB allowing Italian bond yields to spike higher to try and scare the Italian leaders into cutting a better deal. I think there's a little bit of that going on. I don't think it's all of what's going on, but I think it's some of it. Big tech is in embarrassed territory. It is embarrassed territory. If you look at Facebook, if you look at Tesla, you look at some other stocks, they're all in bear market or almost bear market territory for the year. Will this cause issues of leadership at these companies? Asked Scott Colvin. Well, when Elon Musk is your CEO, you have a leadership problem. When Mark Zuckerberg is your CEO, you have a leadership problem. Yeah. At Apple, Amazon? No. Reed Hastings at Netflix? You know, when you have an idiot, a totalitarian fucking stalker, and a virtue signaling homo weenie as your CEOs, Tesla, Facebook, Netflix, yeah, fuck you, Reed Hastings. That's what you got. Because Reed Hastings is terrible. Because he's spending billions of dollars on content no one wants. A lot of repositioning. Tillman's got it right. There's a lot of repositioning of fund managers, and there was some margin selling earlier in the week. There was, on Thursday it was mostly margin related selling. There's jitters about China. The closer we get to the election, there's worries that the Democrats are going to win the House back. There's worries that that the Italians and the EU are not going to come to an agreement, and that's going to shift some money out of Europe. And we finally saw a safe haven bid on Treasury bonds. Finally, but I think I told my subscribers about a week and a half ago on one of my market reports. I said, by the way, when we get to a quarter point move, whenever we get to the next quarter point, 3%, 3.25%, 3.5%, 3.75%, the central banks always like to reposition right around the quarter point range. And we saw the 10-year bond move up to 3.25% and then stop dead cold. That's when the central banks will come in. You can see it in the weekly report from the Federal Reserve. You can see them buying more treasuries and holding them on reserve with the Fed, so they're in a very liquid position so that they can dump them if they need to defend their currencies. So I'm not really surprised about that. We're coming into earnings season. Everybody's a little jittery. And it doesn't take much for all of that to fart badly. Remember, China was off last week too. Chinese came back into the markets this week. Those markets were open. Repositioning had to be dealt with there. Not a surprise. It's not a surprise that October is volatile. And September was telling us that October could have been volatile. Yeah, Jamie Dimon coming down and having to kiss the ring was awesome, by the way. Really? You find that odd, Rocket Man? I don't. Maybe it tells you that they're talking about, why the Republicans haven't gone after the Fed with an audit the Fed legislation. There's a reason for that. Because when Obama was in office, they never wanted to actually audit the Fed. What they wanted to do was make Obama look bad and make themselves look like they were the fiscal conservatives and they were the good stewards of the currency. That's all they were trying to do. It was all virtue signaling. Maxine Waters would be in charge of the House Banking Committee if the Democrats win. My God. Just shut the fucking lights off now, dude. I mean, that's just shut it all down. Just let's stop talking about politics. The whole fucking thing's gonna collapse. Hey, Maxine Waters gets in charge of the banking committee. You've got to be kidding me. What's your prediction on the real estate market with stock markets wobbling? Well, the real estate numbers aren't good. Housing starts are not good. Mortgage rates are rising. Mortgage rates are now over 5%, and mortgage originations are cratering domestically. But stock markets are wobbly because they're not sure what to do relatively. We're coming into a political risk environment, getting close to an election, so it's always gets a little wobbly. The real estate is overvalued. Interest rates are rising. The Fed wants to raise rates, and they're going to continue to raise rates as long as the stock markets continue to rise, because the Fed does not want to be blamed for a stock market bubble. They were blamed for one in 1999. They were blamed for one in 2000. They were trying to. That's why Bernanke was raising rates in 2007, which is what caused the freaking financial crisis. He was worried of a stock market bubble. He thought they believe in the wealth effect. They don't understand anything else, but they think that, and they'll continue to do this. Pepe Escobar says, someone says, if Pepe Escobar heard from a source, they're going to try and crash the markets as a last-ditch effort to get the Democrats in Congress. Exactly. There's a fair amount of that going on. And don't kid yourself that they, in the short term, they can do shit like that. But it's a good thesis and it's a good theory, but it doesn't mean that they actually have the power to do it. But because they really don't. They have the power to move markets with a concentration of headlines and create fear and then let the markets do that on its own. But they don't really have, no one has the money to really, truly move the markets. Yeah. With the amount of debt out there, won't higher interest rates kill the economy? Yeah. But it's a mix of things. A lot of the money in Europe is already repositioning itself, and the Eurodollar markets are draining themselves, and they're going to drain themselves into the United States. Those Eurodollars are going to become dollars as the sovereign debt crisis unwinds, and all of those assets devolve in price, and all that capital comes rushing to the United States. And that's what we're beginning to see that now. That's why the stock market is trading where it is. It's why valuations are kinky. It's why the fundamentalists can't understand what's happening and why this market is so overvalued. Because it's not about absolute value. It's about surviving. It's about where does all this fucking money go? Because you've got it's like all the rain after a hurricane, right? We got a hurricane here about 10 years ago, 12 years ago. That sat on Alachua County. It was only a Cat 1, so it just sat on us and dumped rain on us for a day and a half. And for a month afterwards, my wife was working at Public Works at the time, and for a month afterwards, there was standing water everywhere because this area is a series of swamps, and it's a dead zone. So the whole area, they call it the swamp for a reason, the Ben Hill Griffith Stadium. The reason for that, because Gainesville's built on a swamp, and so. Bleh, The water just sits there and doesn't know what to do. Freedom Sandalwood, fuck off. I'm dead serious. You go fuck yourself, because I will talk about whatever I want. I'll start talking about Star Wars right now, you motherfucker. Fuck off. I'm dead serious. I will have this discussion with everybody who comes into my scope. So, it's the same thing in capital markets. You have trillions of freaking dollars that need to go into billion dollar sized pots. Guess what? The pots overflow. And then what do? Then what happens? I'm not a delicate flower. I feel very strongly that Star Wars is a very important part of this culture. And if you don't understand that part of it, then you don't understand anything about what I'm talking about in any of my scopes, in any of my YouTubes, any of my live streams. If you don't understand that all of this stuff is connected, and if they attack the culture, they're attacking everything. The markets, the political system, everything. And none of it matters if they attack the culture. Fuck off, asshole. Seriously, I just fuck off. If you don't get it, fuck off. I really have no patience for it. You think debt servicing is self-limiting. It is. We reach a point. We have reached a point where we have hit what I call debt saturation worldwide. We can't put any more debt, relatively speaking, we can't put any more debt on the markets. And at some point, everybody calls bullshit on the whole thing and goes, we're paying back, we got our grandkids levered to the hill. How are they going to pay back today's debt? And we're going to, somehow we're going to grow our way out of this? No, we're not. I will block you if all you're going to be is a distraction. I will cut you from the chat. I will block you from my channel. Do you understand? This is hard enough than having some asshole walk into my scope or my live stream and take it over because he's a delicate snowflake that wants his shit talked about. Do you understand? This has been the Gold Goats and Guns Hour. And I'm done. Good night. Keep your stick on the ice.